and are shaped by peace-building initiative in other places. Okay, thank you. Icha, you can continue.
Thank you very much, Ibu Mimi. Good afternoon, dear presenter and participants. It is truly a delight for us in the unit of research and also publication unit here in FEB, Faculty of Cultural Science, to have you all. Welcome to the second book discussion series organized by Faculty of Cultural Science, Universitas Gadjah Mada. My name is Realisa. At home, usually my family called me Lisa, but not to confuse with Ibu Elisabeth. Luckily, I also have a nickname here, Icha, so please call me Icha. And today I will be your moderator for this discussion. So at this occasion, we are going to discuss a very interesting book entitled Gender in Peacebuilding, Local Practices in Indonesia and Nigeria. And I quote here, but the focus of the book is adopting a feminist approach. We analyze such interesting differences to develop a better understanding of the multiple and complex ways in which gender is present in peace-building practices and how it both enables and obstructs transformative goals. I think it's really intriguing. And the book addresses the questions of how does gender inform peace-building initiatives in intersection with other social dynamics and identity categories, and to what effect. We will, of course, hear more about the book as we have three presenters today. Then Ibu Elisabeth Prügl, Ibu Wening Udasmoro, Ibu Arifah, and we also have Ibu Iyi. She insists me to call her Ibu Iyi, Ibu Wiyanti Eddyono. So the agenda for today, we will hear first the presentations from Ibu Elisabeth and also Ibu Wening. We will give each presenter 10 minutes, so hopefully within 20 minutes the presentations will be concluded, and then the second paper will be presented by Ibu Arifah. Ibu Arifah will be given 15 minutes to do presentation. We will hear from our discussant today, Ibu Iyi, and Ibu Iyi will be given 20 minutes to discuss the both papers. And after that, we will have Q&A. So please do not hesitate to post your comments, your questions in this chat. And if you cannot be in Zoom, you also can join us via YouTube. So you also can post the comments in the YouTube live streaming there. Okay, so with no further ado, I would like to invite Ibu Wening and also Ibu Elisabeth Prügl to discuss about their papers. But first, let me also properly introduce both of the speakers. So for the first one, I would like to introduce Ibu Wening Udasmoro. Ibu Wening is Professor of Literature and Gender at Universitas Gadjah Mada in Indonesia. She received her Ph.D. in Gender Studies from the University of Geneva, Switzerland in 2006. She obtained her master's degree in the same field from the same university. She was the dean of this faculty, the Faculty of Cultural Science and UGM, since from 2016 to 2021. The Vice Dean of Academic and Student Affairs at the same faculty, and the Associate Director of Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies. It is really difficult to summarize her achievement and also her publication. So I will just, because there's too many, I will just read her publications for this year, 2002. For example, she wrote Gender Dynamics of Labor Force Participation in Insurgency and Ethno-Religious Conflict, the cases of Aceh and Ambon in International Feminist Journal of Politics. Indonesian Pencak Silat, a book chapter for UNESCO, also published in 2022. The transformation of social imaginary of women's sexuality in Indonesian literature from New Order to Reformasi era, that is published in Journal of International Women's Studies on May 2020, this year. And the second speaker, Ibu Elisabeth Prügl, is Professor of International Relations and the co-director of the Gender Center at the Geneva Graduate Institute. Her research and teaching focus on feminist international relations and gender politics in international governance. She has published on topics including feminist theory and methodology in IR, gender mainstreaming and gender expertise, the neoliberalization of feminism, and the governance, a typical form of women's labor. She has been the responsible applicant for 2 Research for Development projects funded by the Swiss Program for Research on Global Issue for Development. One focusing on gender and land commercialization in Cambodia and Ghana, and one on gender in peacebuilding in Indonesia and Nigeria. Prügl is recipient of the Eminence Scholar Award of the Feminist Theory and Gender Studies section of the International Studies Association. Since January 2022, she is co-editor of the International Feminist Journal of Politics. Wow, it's really amazing, and we cannot wait to hear from the both of you. So please, the screen and time is yours.
Thank you very much, Icha. Lisa, I will start first. We have one slide, so we will share the slide. So let me share the slides. Yeah. Can you see the big screen? Is it okay, Mbak Icha, for the screen?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I think it's clear.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mbak Icha, and also the Vice Dean of Research, Ibu Mimi, who is also present here, and also all of the participants, all of the students, lecturers who come today in our forum. So here, Elisabeth Prügl and I will talk about one of the articles in the book. It is the title is "No Matter What, I've Got Rights: Women's Land Grab Protest in Banyuwangi, East Java." So I think all of you know already East Java, but maybe you don't know exactly where Banyuwangi is. So here in this map, you can see that Banyuwangi is in the border, sea border with several regions, Jember, Bondowoso, Situbondo, and also with sea border with Bali. So why we talk about land problems in Indonesia, especially related to the question of land grab and women protest? We see that during the 1970s, the developmentalist New Order regime appropriated agricultural land for industrial use, including for development of industrial agriculture. We see that during the time, this is the first time that Suharto stepped in the power, and his priority of the development, one of them is for industrial agriculture. The problem is that the regulation of the Suharto government had a tension with the basic agrarian law of 1960s. This law was implemented during the Sukarno regime, which sought to empower peasant and farm laborers by giving them land rights. So farmers and farm laborers were given lands by Sukarno governments. And here we see that land grab done by Suharto governments take place in many different parts of Indonesia. One of the articles, I think, or the book of Dr. Pujo Smedi, our former dean, is about land grab in Kalimantan. So we see that land grab, the question of land grab was everywhere in Indonesian context, yeah, for the industrial agriculture. So what's wrong with land grab in Wongsorejo, Banyuwangi, East Java? after the implementation of the law about the appropriation of the land by new order government, so Wongsorojo resident of Banyuwangi in East Java has protested the expropriation of their land. So since 1970s, for instance, soldiers and village administrator forced farmers to sign the contracts. Of course, at the time, farmers, they didn't know how to write, they didn't know how to read, they were illiterate. So they just used their fingerprints to approve the contract. This contract means that they give permission to transfer the land to PT Wongsorojo, a kapuk plantation company. And the ones who didn't want or refused to give their approval were branded communists. So we see during the time, during Suharto era, the individuals, the groups who were against Suharto's government, sometimes they were branded as communists. So in the 1980s, finally the new government gave land rights to PT Wongsorojo. So over 680 hectares of land and 220 hectares were taken from the farmers of Wongsorojo. Maybe we think, why Suharto regime had these policies? So he used the arguments that all lands belong to the state. So when the government appropriates entitled land for development project, so the argument is that simply reclaiming its own assets and employing them for the common goods, which means that this is the state's land and we can use for the good of the people. But the problem is that there is the impact of these policies. The impact is inequality between the powerful elites, because the elites, the ones who have more money, who have more financial capital, they can secure titles of their lands, even enlarging their lands. We can see, for instance, a lot of plantation company in Kalimantan, they secure thousands of hectares of lands. And on the other side, the poor farmers, they're left without certificates and become the victim of this expropriation. And after the collapse of the New Order regime in 1998, so residents in Wongsorojo organized to reclaim their rights. We see that after Reformasi era, so a lot of people think that they have freedom, they have rights. So a lot of people in many different contexts, they reclaim their rights, including the farmers of Wongsorojo. So the farmers, they united in the organization called Farmer Organization of Wongsorojo Banyuwangi, OPWB, in 1999. So 1 year after the stepping down of Suharto. But unfortunately, in 2015, the Banyuwangi Regency extended their rights, these rights, to allow company to build an industrial estate. So the Regency of Banyuwangi in 2015 extend the rights of the company to build the industrial estate. So here, women protests in Banyuwangi, as we see that there is organization of men, organisasi petani Banyuwangi, but there is also the organization of women farmers called OP2WP, Women Farmer Organization. So in the context of Banyuwangi, this is women who lead the struggle against land grabbing through many different protests. Here in this paper, we argue that political protest can be considered as an aspect of peacebuilding. Why? Because it helps address the structural inequalities often at the bottom of violent conflict and establish a new relationship between communities and the state. So here we see that women's involvement in struggling for land grab has changed over time. So our main focus here is to look at the way genders and land grab protests. For instance, how did the shift from men to women leadership happen? And the second, what role did gender play in the shift? And the third, and what does it mean for gender relation in Wongsorejo and for the type of peace created through the struggle. So from the feminist peace perspective, we see here that the feminists tend to reject the idea that war and peace stand in opposition and are mutually exclusive. So they focus on the way violence is pervasive in societies as they reproduce inequalities, exclusion, and othering. So we see, for instance, from the perspective of the marginalized, violence is experienced every day. The marginal people experience violence every day, whether they're aware or not with this violence. Also, whether in the form of economic insecurity and hunger, crime, domestic violence, misrecognition, and epistemic violence. So inequalities and oppression are often contested, and thus conflict is an integral part of the society. The idea again is that peace is always agonistic, which means that peace is run with subordination, repression, and domination. So the strong groups always marshal all of their force to institutionalize, legitimate, and instantiate a system in order to maintain the strategic position of the privilege, of their privilege. So here, the feminists argue that women's struggle is a crucial site for producing respect and recognition across difference. So if we see the struggle of the woman farmer in East Java, we see that this is a kind of performance of agonistic peace that achieve this kind of recognition of the standpoints of the subordinates. So we see here our arguments, women protest and the struggle for equal power relation. So women in Banyuwangi, they lead the protest. By leading the protest, so it changed gender relation. Why? Because by putting them in front, confronting the military, confronting the people from the company, it changed gender relation. Because when they are in front, then the husband will stay at home and they will do domestic jobs, usually done by women. And this situation rearranged power structure in families and communities. Because the structure in the village, like Wongsorejo Banyuwangi, which is quite remote, the power structure in the family and communities, woman is always in the domestic and men usually in the public sphere. But with this kind of protest, it rearranged power because the power is becoming fluid. Women also can be in front in the arena, in the arena of power. So it realized also family rights against the state, because usually when we see when we think about the power to against the state, is always the power of the majority group, or the power, or the one having big power in the political arena. But here we see that the family also, they have the opportunity, they have the room for being present against the state, and it's established themselves as political citizen, which means that women here, they are not just women having the position in the family, in the domestic sphere, but also they are active as political citizen. And it contributes to change the meaning of political community previously excluded, before they were excluded in the political arena. And by having this land grab protest, they are having this opportunity, they are having the possibility to enter the political arena in the community. So now I give the forum to Lisa, but I will operate the slides.
Thank you, Wening, and thank you everybody for having me here. Thanks for the wonderful introductory words, Ibu I and Ibu Mimi. It's great to be here. As Wening already outlined, our starting point is the land protests starting in 1999 with the formation of the farmers group in Wongsorejo. I'm going to speak about two moments of the events that happened there, namely in 1999 and then in 2014. In 1999, we see the first round of protests led by men. In 2014, that shifts to protests being led by women. What is interesting to see as we talk about gender in this context is the way in which the women of Wongsorecho drew on Ibuism as an inspiration or a reformulated Ibuism, so it became a source of resistance. As Wening outlined, under the New Order regime, and there's a lot of literature in Indonesia around this, there was something that Wirenga called state Ibuism. In other words, it was an understanding that women would be the submissive wives and the devoted mothers, and that General Suharto himself became the super patriarch as the father of the development family, is how Wirenga puts this. In our interviews, and I feel a little funny talking about our interviews here because these were interviews that were obviously done by our colleagues, Wening and Arifah, with other colleagues in Indonesia, but I'll talk about ours, even though I wasn't there. I want to make that very clear. But these interviews show very, very clearly how women in East Java drew on notions of motherhood and on the idea of the state as the father, Suharto as the father, in order to claim their rights. Motherhood justified their struggle. And I have on this slide a quote that I think makes that very clear. This is an interview with SL. And she said, "What would we eat? Me, I didn't go to school. The smart people said, it's okay for the government to take the land. Well, what would the government have the children eat? I'd never gone to school, and I answered like this, I'm one of the government's children too. What would I eat? So I think what is becomes very clear in this quote is that the argument is driven by familial commitments. On the one hand, it's her responsibility to feed her family as a mother and wife. And similarly, the government as the father should have the responsibility to ensure that she can fulfill this responsibility towards her family. And the government, of course, also has a responsibility towards herself. So Ibuism and state Ibuism is turned around here to say, this gives me actually a right to make claims on the state. It allows me a logic to protest. But this is very different ultimately than reenacting the patriarchal imaginary of the New Order era. The women that we interviewed were not simply bystanders providing numbers to the protests organized by the men, but they also strategized independently. They organized sabotage. They tried to kill the kapok seedlings that the company had planted on what they considered to be their land. They often did that secretly from their husbands, and they actually did not shy away from violence. We have several stories where women recount beating up security people and reacting that way. In the end, through the work that they did, and I'm talking here about the period, the first decade of the century, they helped defeat ultimately the kapok plantation. Today, there's no kapok being planted in the area, and the women, we have at least one interview that laughingly said, well, the plants just got tired of us constantly sabotaging the fields. Now, the arrangement here was, this was under an organization that was led by men, in which women participated and strategized in parallel, but they were not in the lead. And Wening, if you can put the new slide. In 2014, when the industrial estate was established and was established again on contested land, this shifted. The women started their own branch, and they actually ended up going into the lead again, in the protest against this estate. The worry was the old ones of being able to feed your family, but they also now had worries about ecological effects and the impact on soil fertility. An elderly villager explained, now the men can't be on the front lines, the ones out front are the women. The women, they have to be dragged along. There is a literature in Indonesia and beyond that talks about the way in which women are often at the front line of protests when it comes to environmental protests and land protests. And many argue that this is actually a kind of instrumentalization of women. It's men using them because they want to reduce violence. And we saw some evidence of this here as well. And the quote here shows this, because if someone were to hit them, they wouldn't hit the women, right? Maybe they'd hurt fellow men, but at most they rustle those women's shirts and hats. And others talked about this as well. They talked about we have to face a lot of things, violence, we are all tired of that, kidnapping is often done. And so the problem should be resolved with a good strategy or approach. I'm now quoting another villager. And he said, for that, using women is one strategy for resolving problems and avoiding violence. So note the formulation is using women. But we actually push back on this interpretation that women were purely the pawns of the men in this situation. Instead, we also have evidence that shows that women made the organization their own. They insisted on meeting at times that worked for them. One of the leaders said, I want to organize the women. This was her idea. The women ended up controlling the finances, not just of their own organization, but of the whole farmers' organization. And the men agreed that this was ultimately a good idea. Again, I have a quote here. Before, there were routine funds, but it didn't work because we weren't careful. After that, things kept developing. The issues didn't reduce in number, but increased. In the end, we gave in. We surrendered the funding issue to the women. Alhamdulillah, they have helped us a lot, especially in our other activities. We were helped a lot by the women. So they didn't easily turn over the finances. There was actually also evidence of some ambivalence there, and men not quite trusting the women. But ultimately, we also saw a lot of evidence of men supporting the women. So we have quotes where men talk about that they don't mind that the cleaning did not happen or the cooking did not happen at home because the women were off protesting. Or there were even quotes that talked about if the women didn't have time for breakfast, the men would bring the food to the protest sites, and they would go shopping and make sure that the women had to eat. Indeed, can you please shift the slide? We would like to argue that this participation in conflict enabled an empowerment of women and a particular new form of citizenship. We saw a lot of quotes that talked about personal bravery. Women were talking about, yes, there's been a change. I am not afraid of anything. We can overcome things together. They would talk about surrendering themselves to the Almighty and being ready to die in this protest, and they don't have to fear this. We can overcome things together. This is a refrain that we heard about all the time. So religion played a role in this, but organization also played a role in this, right? Working together empowered them to not have to fear. We also saw some interesting quotes of women talking about how they learned to speak up. Starting from simple things like, and I'm quoting here from an interview, the interviewer is saying, and if you joined, did you just come physically or did you talk too? The answer was, yeah, I also talked spontaneously, like, Pak, what will the future of the farmers be? Nothing to eat, poor. Right. So this was somebody who then said, well, I'm illiterate and, you know, I didn't make big speeches, but I said these things. Then there were the leaders who talked about, we especially have one very poignant quotation from somebody who for the first time was at a press conference in Gadjah and had to speak up, and how scared she was, but how she ultimately did it, and the pride that she felt in being able to do that. I think what is important, so we're arguing that having agonistic peace requires a particular kind of citizenship. And when we talk about citizenship, we all often think of citizenship as employing the language of rights. And we see that in the struggles in Wongsorecho. Important here is that they got support from the Surabaya Legal Aid Center. There was training. People were trained in political skills, legal skills, in organizing. They actually went to the Human Rights Commission in 2001, accusing the company of violating people's rights. The title of our presentation, No Matter What, I've Got Rights, reflects the same orientation. She said, no matter what, I've got rights. This is the land where I was born, which I must defend for my children and grandchildren. If not, what will my grandchildren have in the future? And her father, she says, had told her that this is your birth land, and this is what makes her know that she has rights. So this is an understanding of rights as customary rights that they have to the farmland. But more than that, we also see that there is a different performance of citizenship going on. We have several quotes where people talk about that the organizations have given them passion, and that it was important to give passion to the youth, and even those who cannot read and write, their role is in giving passion to the youth. So there's a form of passionate citizenship that we saw here as well. A citizenship that needed struggle, a citizenship that actually supports an understanding of peace as agonistic. Final slide, Wening. So I'd like to then go back to our research questions that Wening formulated at the beginning. So we had this question of how did the shift from men's to women's leadership happen? I've described this in detail in the shift from the men's organization to the women's organization, that shift over time. Theoretically, the second question, what role did gender play in this shift? We've suggested that Ibuism played a role here, and that women were able to appropriate the gender constructions of Ibuism, but repurpose them to make political claims. We saw that femininity also was a strategic research it was a strategic resource used by the movement. They said, we're going to put women in the front. So they actually knew about gender, and they knew how to use gender intentionally. But this also had unintended consequences. So this putting women in the front became women in the front. Women actually did become the leaders, and women did get empowered through their political leadership. So this is that next question. We had that together. I split them apart here. What does the shift in leadership for gender relations mean for gender relations in Wongsrecho? We are claiming that there was actually an empowerment of women that was happening. And then finally, the question of what type of peace is created through the struggle. This is not a peace that amounts to harmony, but it is a peace that allows for clashing interests and to surface, to be dealt with, to be encountered, for opponents to speak up, not to become enemies, but to speak up and engage with each other, and to recognize the differences between themselves. So this is a dissident kind of peace politics that employs the language of rights, but also engages in a passionate politics. So, and we would suggest that as these opponents participate in this politics, they're actually building a new polity. It's a polity in which women have a place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Wening, and also Ibu Lisa. We have learned a lot from the presentations. I will not repeat, but I guess maybe we can highlight some points that we have learned about. First, the history of the conflict of the land itself between the state and also the people in Banyuwangi. And then we also see the process, the shifting process of how the protest was led by men and then led by women. And Elisabeth at the end also highlighted, also underlined that actually the gender roles here with the Ibuism perspective kind of like also support the conditions where then women becomes the leader and even make like their own organizations, and they make the new gender divisions even of the protest by making organizations of their own, controlling finances and also support from men. And I think it's really interesting that with this shifting roles of who lead the protest also shifts the power relations or structure within the family and also the community. I think we will get a lot of questions probably later about this point as well. And also we have learned about the women empowerment, that actually is not only about the personal bravery and also the public speaking skills, but also more importantly probably is also their consciousness of becoming the citizen, not copying the language of rights. I wrote the paper and it's really interesting, not only imitating the kind of like westernized ideas of the rights, but they also have their own understanding of what right is, meaning that they've born in the land and therefore they have certain rights that they have to ask from the government or the state, and they also have developed patience to train the youth as well to continue the spirit. I think this is really interesting and enlightening a perspective from this paper. Now we're ready to listen to Ibu Arifah Rahmawati, who will present her paper entitled Questioning the Mantra All for One and One for All, the reintegrations of Aceh's female ex-combatant. Before I give the screen to Ibu Arifah, allow me to introduce her a little bit. Ibu Arifah holds a Ph.D. in Policy Studies from the Postgraduate School of Universitas Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta, Indonesia, and a master's degree in Security Studies from the Naval Postgraduate School, Montgomery, California, USA. She is currently a lecturer at the Universitas Muhammadiyah Madiun of East Java, Indonesia, and has been a researcher at the UGM Center for Security and Peace Studies since 1997. So Ibu Arifah, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Icha, the moderator. And I would like, first of all, I would like to congratulate the Faculty of Cultural Science, who already start the regular discussion and review book. I think it is very good program that we need to continue to give space to the student, to the lecturer, or to the researcher to present their finding for their research. Actually, it's very good. I congratulate for that. And also, I would like to say hi to our colleagues from Aceh and also from Maluku, Kak Rahal, Bang Tabrani, Jimmy, Tati, who already joined in this discussion, because we actually, Wening and Lisa, realized that this book will not come and become a very good book without their contribution, especially with helping us in taking the data and in doing the interview, interpreted the local language into our Bahasa language. So I think, thank you for our colleagues here. And I hope you all have a good health and safe from all the disaster, and as well as the pandemic and also the climate change recently that we have experienced. So, my presentation actually is about also the powerful women in another part of Indonesia, in Aceh. I put the different title in this presentation for today's discussion, but yes, in the book, actually, I give title of the questioning the mantra all for one and one for all, because I will later explore why the title is coming like that, because I think it is very interesting, because I think my chapter in this book would like to explore the complex ways in which gender cut off in making a just and fair peace building, especially during the reintegration process of Aceh after the war was ended in 2005 in Aceh. Next, please. So my outline for today's presentation is quite simple. The first, at the beginning, I would like to share about what is the Inong Bale. It is the Aceh's female combatant, the military wings of the Free Aceh Movement, or GAM, that has been set up in late 1919 by the GAM, because they need to enterprise their movement, political movement, into more in the international era and bring women into the arena. Yeah. And after I explain about this, who are the Inong Bale, is what are their role, then I would like about what happened when the war is over, when the peace agreement has been signed in Helsinki in August 2005. What is the role, and where are the female combatants who actively before or during the conflict, during the war, they're very active in participating in the violent conflict in Aceh. And then at the end, I would like to address some issues regarding the gender contestation in peace building in the case of the Aceh after the peace agreement. Next, please. Yeah, I think not all, even Indonesians, realize that actually women play quite an active role in Aceh during the war start in 1979 to 2005. Yeah, we all, even myself, I think I didn't realize that there were women military wing of GAM on that conflict, but they were there actually. So somehow I think my paper or my research disrupted the simplistic stories of women as a passive group of people, and only a victim of war. So this research saw that actually women also quite active in kind of violent conflict and being a combatant. Together with men, they went to the jungle, they went to the forest and taking gum, as you can see from this picture. So, and the number is quite a lot. According to them, it was about 2015 combatant. And the way we found them actually is really interesting because we first met one woman that we thought the ordinary women, but when we were listening her, and we just realized that she was actually a combatant, and we didn't know that. So then from her, we know that exactly there are so many women actively involved in the war during the GAM and Indonesia government fought in 1979 to 2005. Yeah. And the Inong Bale, they call it the Inong Bale. Inong mean women, Bale is mean widows. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that this Inong Bale all are women, all are widow, but most of them were widow. Most of them also they are unmarried. So very little were widow, but most of them are unmarried. So they're quite young because it was about 14 to 22 years old when they joining the military wing of GAM or the Inong Bale. And mostly they come from the rural area where usually the area or the village has been identified by the Indonesian military as the GAM stronghold villages. And of course, there were so many historical and sociological aspects why then this village has been called as the GAM stronghold and then has been marked as the red areas by the Indonesian military. Yeah. But again, back to this Inong Bale member, mostly they only graduated from the high school. Some of them only got the SMP or junior school. And of course, they have a very insecure situation because they live and they were born, they will live in the area that has been marked by as red villages by the Indonesian military. So this is a little bit the Inong Bale. And the next slide, I would like to show you what is the factor that drove them to participate in political violence. Yeah, theoretically, it says that at least there are pushes and pull factor for women to involve in political violence. But for the case of the Inong Bale, I found another factor, which is, I call it as legitimized factor, for the Chinese women to participate in the political violence. For the pushes factor, I found that it is because they have family history. It was true that most of the Inong Bale members have a family background who previously participate as the pemberontak or the member of the GAM or the Aceh Merdeka movement. So long before the GAM emerged, actually, there was a struggle against the Indonesia government that we call is the DITII, Darul Islam, and it was led by Daud Ber'ah. And most of the Inong Bale family, they joining that movement. So that's why they have the family history. For them, it become being part of the struggle movement is kind of, from their perspective of the family, from their parents, they has to be part of the movement of the GAM. So also another pushes factor is they have biography availability because they married, they already widow, they don't have children, they are still young, they have a lot of energy, they have a free time because they didn't go to school, They didn't do anything in their home, in their village. So they are free to joining that kind of movement. And another, I think, and the most important factor for this pushes factor is sense of insecurity. According to them, according to my informant, our informant for this case, they said that if I didn't go to the jungle joining the gang, then I will be a victim of the Indonesian military or police, being harassed sexually or being raped or being targeted as the as the gang member. So they are really in the situation of insecure physically and psychologically as well as economically, because during the war, during the conflict, there were situations then where they couldn't even eat once a day. So for them, participate in the movement give them also security in terms of the physical protection as well as economic protection. One of our informant at the time said that I have to participate because I couldn't eat any food at all, so that my family. So no, so I think in that sense, I think makes sense that because of this pushes factor, then young women try to avoid themselves being a victim of the violence from the Indonesian government. So they joining the movement, political violent movement, and they have blessing from their family because their parent previously participate on that movement, and they are free to joining the movement. So these three aspects, actually, I put it as the pushes factor for them to participate in political violence. And interestingly, I found that also there is a pull factor that I call is masculinity's image. Yeah, most of them say that actually I joining GAM because within being GAM member, they can be easily become a military officer without having training, without having a certain criteria. As long as you are willing to join, then they will give you uniform, they will give you rank, yeah, and they will give you weapon to do something. And for them, wearing uniform, wearing helmet, wearing carrying a gun is kind of for them is sense of power. Yeah. So I am no longer a weak person because I have the uniform, I have my gun, so I can do something to protect myself and my family and my village. Yeah. So this kind of masculinity's image actually, and also masculinity's in the sense of having power, actually becoming one aspect of the pull factor for them. And of course, another aspect is we heard a lot about the Aceh heroism, I call, because I think we heard about Cut Nyak-Din, about Cut Mutia, and other queen in Aceh who already saw their power not only in land but on the sea. Laksamana Hayati, she was the command of the sea troop of the Aceh Sultanate at the time. And this kind of image of the heroism also encouraged the young Acehese women to joining the political violence because they heritage this heroism, so they want to continue this heroism and to be warrior in order to protect themselves as well as the family and the other village people. And then interestingly, I found that it's not yet in the theory about legitimized, which is jihad calling on holy war. Because we know that Acehnese, they follow the Islamic values quite strictly since the beginning. Before they becoming a nation, So they understand that actually fighting against other people or other country or other government who want to destroy the Acehnes image or the Acehnes proudness, it is mandatory for women, for men, for young, from old people, from the countryside, from the town, rich women, rich people, poor people. They have that kind of mandatory to fight against what they call as kafir, or other people or other group of people who want to destroy the Acehnes nation, something like that. So this legitimized factor actually as a fighting against other that they call as kafir is holy war. So they will be rewarded as a martyr, and they will put in the heaven when they have to die for this struggle, for this war, or for this conflict, something like that. I think these three factor, process, pull, and legitimized factor, is really strongly encourage and influence the young woman to participate in the political violence. That's again, it will disrupt our imagination about women that has been usually portrayed as weak and passive and only become a victim of the conflict or war. Yeah. So this very interesting aspect that we need to understand, why at some certain point in a certain area, women, as Lisa and also Mbak Wening told us, really in front of any struggle to defend their right, to defend their dignity, to defend their life, and so that they do not submissive to what is happening, by really active in involving in this kind of situation when their life is in danger. So next. So what was happening then? After, in 15 August of 2005, the GAM and the Indonesian government finally signing the peace agreement, what we call is the Helsinki Agreement. Yeah. Where were these Inong Bali, the female combatant, what were they doing after the war was ended? Yeah. So in order to understand their participation is post-conflict setting, or we can also call it as the peace building phase, more specifically in the reintegration phase, I would like to understand, were they participate in this peace building program or activities after the peace has been signed? And how then I could measure who can participate in what and how. So in order to understand that, so I try to look at three aspects of women participation during the conflict, during the war and after that. So I try to look at their leadership as a female combatant, and then their loyalty as the GAM member. Yeah. And also I would like to see whether or not they have power or kinship ties with the GAM member or GAM elite that all are men. So these three factors I try to link later on, then how it will become a factor for them, the female ex-combatant or women ex-combatant, to participate in peace building program or activities. Next, please. So here I show you a matrix, how I measure the female combatant status during the conflict in post-conflict structural situation, or I call it structural benefit. Yeah. So I use only 10 informant, but this is the 10 informant that actually more than that, but I only use 10 because then it will be very varied. But in general, these 10 informant or the female ex-combatant portray the situation, the condition of the female combatant in general. First, I would like to see the kinship with the GAM elite. You will see among the 10, only 3 have the kinship. Yeah. But if we look at their leadership, especially their leadership during their participation in the military wing, because here we found at least 5 among 10 have kind of leadership position, as we call it mu'alim, because 5 of them becoming commander for the women troops. Yeah. So as a mu'alim or commander, they didn't only train the women combatant, but they also train male combatant. So they really have a kind of leadership status during their participation as a military wing of GAM. So also I would like to see their loyalty. What I measure this loyalty is whether they leaving the jungle before the signing of the peace agreement or after. Yeah. So you will see among the 10, actually, most of them leaving after the peace agreement. So it means that they're quite loyal. Whatever situation they face at the time during the conflict, they stay and stick together with their comrades in the jungle and the forest, and they didn't want to leave the forest and the jungle before their commander said so. So after the peace agreement, the commander said, okay, now all female and male combatants, you have to giving up your weapon. Yeah. With giving up the weapon, we will compensate you with some certain amount of money, something like that. So most of them actually leaving after the signing the peace agreement, means that they are quite loyal with their political, with their participation or involvement in the political fight. Yeah. But interestingly, when I look at the post-conflict situation, yeah, and this post-conflict structural benefit, and that I mentioned, the peacebuilding program during the reintegration phase, I try to look at 3 aspects of reintegration. First is economic reintegration. The second is about social reintegration. And the third is about political reintegration. But for the social reintegration, fortunately, people, the Aceh people, very welcome to the combatant, male and female, when they came back to the village. Again, remember, because one of the push factor, because they have family background, yeah, and they have a blessing for the family, their parent, and also the villager. So of course, when the war was ended, they were welcomed by their villager as a family, and they has been praised as a hero at the time. Yeah. So in the social reintegration, there were almost no problem at all for the Acehnes combatant. Yeah. But when it comes to the economics reintegration or economics benefit of the reintegration, we will see only for female ex-combatant who get the benefit. Yeah. This benefit actually is various two aspects. First is we call it a compensation money. I mentioned before, when you surrender the weapon, then the GAM leader will compensate their weapon. It was not a GAM leader, but the Indonesia government actually compensate their weapon when they surrender their weapon. So, yeah. So we'll see, even they all loyal, but only 4 female combatants who get the benefit of this reintegration compensation fund. Yeah. And then, but for the it is typo, formal employment, access to the resources, which is resources as the employment of the local government. Most of them got it, got the access to be part of the local government, and then also they got the salary, even though at the time they have been contracted employee only 1 year, and each year it has to be renewal. And as far as I understand, they only has been employed for 3 years, but at least for 3 years they got the salary from the local government. And interestingly, on the political reintegration aspect, we see only 3 of them got the access for that. What I mean, the access for the political reintegration is support from the ex-GAM political party for the female ex-combatant to nominate themselves as the local legislative member. Only 3 of them have the support from the ex-GAM political party, even though 3 of them were failed to be a member of the local political party. So with this figure, I think I would like to understand why. What is really the factor give them benefit? What is the factor that influence most for the female ex-combatant so that they will get access for the economic and political reintegration or political or benefit from the peace building or reintegration process? So from this chart, from this metric, I found, I think I almost, can you please next slide? So here is the gender dimension in peace building in Aceh case. So you will see that gender in this case intersect with other identities, whether it is their leadership, their loyalty, and their kinship with the man in power or ex-GAM in power. And this identity intersection between gender and other social identity actually influence the female ex-combatant who will get benefit from the reintegration programs. As I mentioned, access to economic and political benefit actually is quite limited, but it is strongly influenced by kinship with male and proximity to men in power. Even though you are loyal, you have leadership, and you are quite strong enough, but if the female combatant don't have any kinship tied or proximity to men in power or GAM's elite, which is male in power, men in power, they will not get any benefit at all. If they get the benefit, it's very limited, either the economic or the political, but you will not get both of the benefit unless you get the kinship with male and proximity to men in power, which is men GAM in power. So with this factor, actually, with this equation, I would like to say that when we call about women, especially Aceh female ex-combatant, we cannot see them as a homogeneous. They are quite heterogeneous. Even they have kind of layer or structure. Female ex-combatant who really in the highest level because they have a quite very strong kinship with the man in power. Either they are the daughter of, they are wife of, or they kind of niece of man in power. It is there in the elite. If you have in the second layer, I think if your kinship are men in power, but at the quite more local level, then you are in the second layer of this female ex-combatant group. And the lowest of the female ex-combatant layer is our female combatant who didn't have any kinship at all to the men in power. So then they didn't have any access both to the economic and political benefit from the peace building or reintegration program or activities. So for the closing, I would like to summarize that post-conflict peace building or reintegration and especially reintegration phase in Aceh, our program, actually created inequality even among ex-combatant. Female ex-combatant in this case, because my research focused on the female ex-combatant. But I think next time I would like to see whether this kind of inequalities also happen among the male combatant. In general, maybe it is so, but I don't have any data to support my argument. But I think it will be very interesting to see, and I hope my colleagues from the Aceh, Kak Rahal, Yuva, Bang Tabrani, you will continue this kind of research in order to give to make have a better knowledge and understanding in relation between gender and peace building. I think so. I think that's Mbak Ocha. I give time and screen to you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ibu Arifah, for the very interesting and also informative presentations and the paper. Yeah, it's quite striking to learn that the number of the women combatants reached 2,500. I didn't know that before, and we have learned from the presentations and also the paper about the role and the profile of Inang Ballet, and then we also learned about the factors why the women participating the violent conflicts, political violence conflicts as well, the pushes, the pulls, and also the legitimized factors has been discussed, and we can see here probably a bit different from the previous paper who highlights on the femininity of the women in the protest, and here the masculinity's image becomes the pull factors for women to be involved here. We also have learned about the different situations and even the inequalities between the women combatants post conflicts, and the theory or approach of intersectionality has been used here. I think this is really interesting. So we will move to Ibu E as our discussant this afternoon. Again, I would like to say a few words to introduce Ibu Sri Wiyanti Eddyono. As she is an assistant professor at Criminal Law Department of Faculty of Law and the head of Master in Law, Faculty of Law, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta, Indonesia. She is chairing Law, Gender and Society Research Center. She has women's activist background, and she was working in Women Legal Aid or LBH APIK, and was the commissioner in National Commission on Violence Against Women or Komnas Perempuan before teaching in UGM. She is a board member of the Empowerment for Women's of Householder atau PEKA, PEKKA Foundations, and the Women's Ulama Networks of Alimat. She is the author of Women's Empowerment in Indonesia, year 2019. Her current research activities are in the areas of women human rights law, victimology, women access to justice, violence against women, and gender equality law and policy reform in Indonesia and Asia context. We are really cannot wait to hear your We expect very fantastic discussion from you, Ibu I. So the screen is yours.
Terima kasih Mbak Lisa for the introduction, and of course I want to give a very appreciation for Bu Wening, Bu Elisabeth, and Mbak Arifah today, because it is a very important book that for us particularly, because I know that publishing a book is very hard work. Research itself is very interesting. You go to the field, you meet people, you learn a lot from them. But after that, you have to put it into the research findings. and then struggle with, kind of like a concept to make a link between your findings to the concept. And then it's become a published a process of a painful process for establishing a book. So again, I want to say congratulations. So today I want to share my opinion with regard to the book. There are 5 points that I want to discuss. I will provide a PPT for that. It's a very short PPT, so it's only about 5 pages. I think I think the first point, it is a very interesting book series. It discusses women experiences in various conflict and post-conflict. So-called, perhaps we can say that the peacekeeping programs. Yeah, we do know, particularly in our policy in Indonesia, related to the conflict, we have a very narrow definitions of conflict, which only related to social conflict. So the policy does not see different contexts of conflict, for example, which discussed in this book, the natural resources with regard to Delta state oil exploitations. So it is a very important aspect. And then land grabbing, and of course, the conflict that related to the state and then civil society, including the military. So it involves military, corporations, and government. So I think this book presents evidence that with regard to the conflict, women have experienced different kind of conflict. The context of the conflict is very important, and then the role of the women in different conflict also very various. So I think what we can see in Aceh, but Arifah has already mentioned about, we found the women's role with kind of like across the stereotype as the combatant. And then, but in the Delta state oil exploitations, we can see that the roles of women is also diverse. There are women who join with the vigilant, but the other part of women who also become a certain kind of mother, try to make sure that there is no conflict, there is no violence in the community. So that's kind of a different role of women as well. While in Ambon community, there is a religious conflict, which is perhaps in our policy in national level, Mbak Arifah, related only discuss about this conflict. Yeah, and then we know that Indonesia also have various land conflict, which is not having a certain kind of standard how actually women's gender kind of integrations into that particular peace conflict. So it's kind of like departmentalized of the issues that land grabbing, as if it is not a women issues. Land grabbing is related to farmer. Farmer is not women. So that's kind of an issue that's come up. And then also in a pre-colonial context, we discuss about the continuous about the pre-colonialized, westernized, and so on. So it is kind of tensions that happens to women's in daily life. So conflict can be part of the women's everyday life, which is important to highlight. The second aspect is related to what we call as a project or program or intervention of peace building. So I found in the book, when I read different kind of chapter, there is a strong criticism from the community itself with regard to the kind of different intervention. So there are discussions about the perspective. This is outsider perspective. This is inside initiative. This is related to the Western colonializing. It is related to tension to the local value. So I think there is always typically where the projects come out from outside and then it goes to the community. So it is create a tensions among the community. So how far does the tensions come up. I think it's depend on the interactions, whether the interaction between the outsider and inside is very intensive, and then I think the new conflict can be, the new tension can be also addressed. But I think the more important in this particular book, it shows there are different kind of media, which influence to the creating space for women to interact among their community, between their community and abroad, and then of course with different kind of stakeholder as well. So it means that creating space will not have any one singular approach. So it can be through economic interventions, it can be through the arts. I think the issue in written by Bu Wening and Elisabeth with regard to the art, and then how does gender perceptions into the art, and then what is expression of them with the art is very visible. Yeah, so I think this can be very interesting approach in conducting a peacekeeping mechanism, peacekeeping situation. And then in Aceh, I think it discussed a lot about the informal justice mechanism, which is through commission and reconciliation, which it provide one aspect, the open space for them to discuss about the conflict. But in the other aspect, there is a questions about what is the impact to women. So I think these also critical points to discuss about any kind of space, any kind of media, so-called as the intervention or initiative, or I can say that it is more like the interaction and initiative for peace. Yeah. So another paper that I found is very interesting about the recent action. So how do we map the condition, and that how do we move forward? How do we utilize the findings to do practically intervention? So it is one of the research itself become a media, particularly when we involve local people, local researchers, and they learn a lot and they do reflections about their own problems. And the other media that I think is important as well is related to the organization. It comes up from the return of the land grabbing in Banyuwangi. I think the women's mentions about organization is very important to create space for them to, to address the problem. So, but again, there is always tensions between power relation, power imbalance. I think this is the core issue in this particular book. It discusses about the layers of power that happens to women. And then when they actually able to move the one power, it doesn't mean that they are free from other repressiveness. So it means that the powers relation is very strong, and then it has layers, and it is very difficult for them even to comes up to address the situation. Then I found that the third point I want to say that I found that there are very important and very relevant gender issues or gender tensions that comes up into the paper. It's strongly discussed almost in each subchapter. Yeah. So the first one, which Mbak Arifah has already mentioned about the stereotype, gender stereotype, that women is always seen as a victim, even in conflict. They are weak, they are vulnerable, they are powerless or subjugated, but we can see they might have a different role as well. They are conducting a very active role, but in the other way around, they might involve in the conflict itself. So for example, as the combatant, and then the member of vigilante groups, or the protester. Even the protester here, I can say that it is part of the, kind of the person, but the protester they might utilize the violence as well. They might have a strategy to in front of the struggle. So I think this actually provide more evidences about the different roles of women in society, and then women have not only as a victim, but they are active role, whether it is categorized as under negative or positive rules. Yeah, so it is become discussed later on. So another issue related to the violence, masculine and so feminine. So I think this comes up to the paper by Bu Wening with regard to the art. Yeah, I think it is very interesting for me, because when I read that, there is a constructions of gender construction that very rooted, even though they has already past conflict, even though they are already no longer as a conflict, the way how they express themselves is a very gender constructed. As a man, very masculine by providing symbol in the way how they express the art, and then in the other way around, also for the women. Yeah, so I think this kind of violent masculine and soft feminine become a stereotype, and somehow it is need to be crossed, but in many aspects it is still very strongly existed. Yeah, and another issue is about the private and public. The very interesting story is related to the Inong Ballet written by Arifah. So even though they were going to the public, they were become the combatant, but they have to get permission from their parents in order to join with the gang. Yeah, and then post-conflict area, it's supposed to be they are recognized. Yeah, but however, but the problem is the kinship, the relations between the family and the male actors influence to the way how they get the position in the community. So I think this is discussing about public versus a private. Private is always a woman, public is a man, but there is a woman who goes into the public, but still the private relation, individual relation is very influenced to the way how they can be, conducting their role in the public as well. So that's another issue. And then this kind of tensions comes up to the issue of legitimation of gender division is very strong in post, and then even though there are stories in order to showing up, there are women who actually across their gender division, but they are still very problematic. And then its impact to the exclusion in the decision-making process, silencing violence in conflict. I think it is a very important aspect as well, because during conflict, it seems that violence against women is not recognized. If it is happen, and then there is a certain kind of perceptions that not need to be discussed, because usually we have a long purpose to avoid the conflict, but the conflict here is more likely to the area of the public. So the questions later on then, whether the violence against women in post-conflict is recognized or not. I think one of the paper discussed about it. And then it seems that there is a condition where women is utilized only in some part of the strategy, rather but is this not recognized? Yeah, utilized means that they are utilized as combatant, they are utilized as the protester, but they are not really have a position strongly in community. Even the community discuss about some of the quotations that I found is very interesting, that it is not, it's showing up that women are not recognized in the community as importantly. Yeah, and then one of the very important aspect in this paper is about the counter of universalizations. the counter of the homogeneity. I think this is very strongly discussed in almost every paper. So with regard to this, I think the question for us is to analyze is whether during conflict and after conflict or in peace situation, whether there are the changing of women situations and position, and how far this can be shifting to the more equality, because I think there are kind of like complaint for the community, including the women. Yeah. One of the quotations that comes up in Ibu Arifah and also in other paper is about, yes, it is conflict, but it is not fair. Yes, it is conflict, but it is not justice. So perhaps there is questions about the post-conflict situations with regard to women. They are part of the rule to conduct a resistance. They are trying to access, to participate, and even to do some control, but the exclusion is continued. So this is something that I want to discuss further, even though we can see that this the situation where the women's agency are very visible as well. So there are two sides. Yeah, the women's agencies are very visible, but in the same times, the conditions are very stressful and very oppressive to the women, so that they are questioning themselves with regard to the peace and then post-conflict situations. And because of that, I think it is very important in order to understand the conflict. It is very important to understand the diversity of rules. I think we do have to discuss more about gender-based violence, and we do have to discuss about women's leadership, as Elisabeth has already mentioned before. And then perhaps we can discuss more about how do we utilize this research for actions, what kind of module, what kind of way in order to do post-conflict intervention. I don't like to say that interventions, but I think this is something that we need to discuss. And then perhaps in Indonesia context, post-conflict is no longer supported with a different program of the government. So it seems that Indonesia has already in the peace condition, so that the programs to the community are no longer exist as the call as post-conflict program. So this can be problematic as well, because from my experiences working in the field and then do research with them, there are situations which post-conflict is still continue. Yeah, I think the conflict itself has provide damage to them, and then not so much recovery from the conflict. So this is another issue that I want to point out. So again, thank you very much for Bu Elisabeth, Arifah, and also Bu Wening. I'm not sure whether I provide more, oppressive point of view, but I think I do like this. It is the evidence of the women's agency, but in the same time, it's also the evidence of the power structure that are very strongly that happens to the women, even though they are trying very hard to overcome that situations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Iyi. It's very comprehensive and very interesting discussion that you have provided. I will not try to repeat anything because it is really comprehensive and I don't want to miss anything. Well, actually, we want to also give the chance for all the speakers, for the participants, for the presenter to give like short feedbacks on Ibu Iyi comments, maybe like 5 minutes each paper, but we would like to also invite the participants to please comments, or like if you have questions, just raise your hands and just yes, we can see here Ibu Diana. Maybe we can see like one or two more that we can gather all the questions so that all the presenters, or maybe also the Ibu E also can respond later. Okay, maybe Ibu Diana, please, if you, yeah.
Yes, okay. Thank you for the time and the opportunity. My name is Diana, and I'm from UNESA, Universitas Negeri Surabaya. This is a very interesting topic for me. I want to ask many questions, but I think there's not enough time, and maybe my knowledge about gender also is not too much. But there's one thing that I'm interested in, because from Bu Arifah's book and from Professor Elisabeth, talking about a woman and their combat, but at the end, they tend to touch the soft part of a woman. For instance, like in Moderator, is it Moderator? There was a community where they have to struggle to be able to survive. But then the dominant group, for me here is the men, needs help to be able to, how you say that? To be able to solve the problem in that area. And the next, and the other part of the community is women. It's most part of the community there are women. And they are given chance to be able to participate in the I don't know, the struggle there, and this will automatically will touch the woman's feeling or the woman's emotion there, and they think that they have the opportunity. This also goes to Bu Arifah. They are soldiers and they have to defend their not country but the province, and they know that the dominant group there, and which are men, need help to be able to, give to go combat, and they have to be trained and so on and so forth to be able to do that. Again, they are touched through their weakness as a woman, as young ladies, and they are again, they're still emotional. Now, if we look at these two and we compare to other parts of the world, like in Japan or in Europe, they tend to be more specific of their actions. For instance, I'm not sure whether it's right to say this or not, but in Japan, women tends to not to get married. Women tends not to have babies. It's similar to the Westerns. So they want to show that that they're able to, give give their actions to the world, and it means something. So when you see what I see is, one is against the natural character of a woman, and the other are just talking about the natural things. For instance, what I mean is, like an ecofeminism, they already talked about how women does not want to fed their babies, and those. The one thing is that if we want to have peace, is it peace so just to solve a problem, or is it peace for the woman itself? Peace, I mean, peace of, oh yeah, they participate in the problems. But what I think is that is the problem, is the men's problem. Patriarchy system has a problem and they need help for the woman, and they touch the woman's weakness or emotions just to fulfill or just to solve the problems of what just happened. Yeah, I hope I can explain that. Excuse me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Diana. We still invite other participants. If you have questions or comments, please raise your hands or maybe just write in the chat box. Okay, if not yet, probably I can use my privilege as moderator to also ask questions for each paper. For the first paper for Bu Wening and Bu Elisabeth Prügl, maybe this is like typical or questions regarding the agency, right? Because you also mentioned, or maybe the book also mentioned about the consciousness and the unconsciousness of action. I wonder if the strategy to utilize their vulnerability as women and like the femininity to lead the protest, is it intentionally like consciously taken since in the beginning, or is it also a process like that before it was more the men who just suggest this kind of strategy and later on then they know that it's working, so that they have like more consciousness to do this kind of, probably quote unquote exploit their femininity to get this, because I think that is also explain the power struggles, or like the negotiation of power between men and women as well. And for Ibu Arifah, I have a question regarding the masculinity that you said in the post-conflict in Aceh. I'm wondering if it's not only about the culture or maybe the local politics that entails to the masculinity in itself, or patriarchy, I mean, to patriarchy, but also is it also a display to international community or probably to Indonesian government as well, or to outsider of like Aceh people, to show that they have distinct way of doing things and not really like easily intervened by probably international or like quote unquote probably like Western approach of equality and stuff like that. Thank you, and please, I will give the floor, the time for each speakers, but also please also give maybe short response to what Ibu I mentioned in the discussion as well. So maybe we can start with Ibu Wening, Ibu Elisabeth, and then Ibu Arifah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mbak Icha. And thank you very much, Mbak Yi, for your discussion. It's very interesting that you can really map our thinking from our book. Yeah, this book is written by all of us, all of the researcher, and come from not only from Indonesia but also from Switzerland and also from Nigeria. So we have different experience in terms of how conflict and peace building becoming a process on the one side, and also becoming a way of how society try to struggle, for having their idea, for having to speak up, etc. So which is true that on the one side there is a kind of agency, etc. But on the other side, I agree that the wall is so strong. The wall is so strong, and it is very difficult to be, to break that wall. This is also, I think, the things that we found in different experience of our research in Ambon, in East Java, and also in Aceh. And in regards to the question of Mbak Diana about the question that this is the conflict is a man's problem, and why suddenly women they have to solve the problem in the question of land grab in East Java. This is the case in many different experience in Indonesia, like the question of PKL, for instance. Yeah, the the man or woman who sell the foods on the street, and they have to go out from that street by the government, and the one who struggle in front are women. But we see here that we deal also with the question of gender hierarchy on the one side, but also the question of social hierarchy, where people coming from the poor situation, they have to struggle, both of them, not just men. Like here the question of land, the land grab in Banyuwangi, the property, the ones who the land doesn't only belong to men, but it belongs also to women. So they also struggle for that. They also struggle for the land of their parents. As it said, they don't want just to depend on men to do it, because they think they can do it. So there is a kind of participation of women, and they do it because of their strong collectiveness, their strong idea. And when I interview them in East Java, in Mongsorejo, Banyuwangi, we see how they don't only struggle for the land, but they also struggle for like a kind of against the capitalism. They won't also struggle for the environment, etc. So they have a lot of ideas in their mind, and they want to be present there, not only because it's always men and who do conflict or who make a conflict, and they just surrender for that. So there is a kind of participation, or I follow the question of Mbak Icha about the question of agency. So here a bit, I think it's a bit the same, whether it is the agency is their own idea, or this is supported by men to do it. So we see from the interview, for instance, and also when I remember the interview, it's women who created this, the program. So how they have the idea to put the poison in the kapuk plantation, for instance, and how they try to struggle using the instruments of the kitchen as a symbol of this strategic of feminine strategic essential. Feminine strategic essentialism. For instance, we read Luz Irigare or Gayatri Spivak. There is one of the aspect called feminine essentialism, the strategic feminization. Yeah, the strategic feminization. Maybe we think this is essentialist, using femininity in order to struggle, but in many different contexts it works. How a lot of conflict have been solved by women using femininity, not always using their masculine muscle like male. So there are so many strategies in order to solve the problem, and this is the things I think that we found it a kind of best practices that we see from different conflict settings and peace building settings. Yeah, this is from Mbak Icha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Wening. Please, Ibu Lisa, to continue.
Yes, thank you so much, first of all, for these great comments, Ibu I, and also for great questions. I like Wening. I feel like you really captured what we were trying to do, and you did it better than we could have ever done, because you looked at what we were doing through a fresh eye. I would like to make 3 comments. The first comment is, one thing that struck me as I listened to you talk is that so much of what we are talking about in this book is actually what feminists call the continuum of violence. In other words, and I think that's where you were, what I heard you, and I know you have talked about this as well. So, and what we mean by that is, so the observation that we have an expansive definition of conflicts is related to an understanding that war and peace are not two opposite things, but that there is actually a continuum from war to peace and from peace to war, and that is anchored in violence. And so as a result, looking at resource conflicts as well as insurgencies or ethnic violence makes total sense, because they are part of a continuum. And that continuum, okay, the constructions that we have in our minds about war and peace are gendered constructs. We think of war as something that men do, that violence is something that men do, and women are peaceful, and so on. I mean, we know these. But when we refuse the opposition between war and peace, I think we implicitly also refuse the simple binary opposition between what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And I think, again, in your comments, that was very clear, is when you were saying, well, you know, the women go in the public in the case of Arifah's paper, and the private follows them, right? The private is always there. And vice versa, we also know that the private is not just private, but actually there's a lot of politics in the private. So I do think these things are connected. And I think that gives me an answer maybe also to Diana's question. So you're saying in a way that, you know, women are still touched through their weakness, as you say, you know, when they go into the public sphere, and they support men, right? But it's the men kind of that are still in charge, and then this empowerment happens kind of, you know, by accident almost. I think that I think that in a way you are right about that. I'm not entirely sure that I would think of that strategy as so different from what women in Japan and Europe are doing, because this inadvertentness of empowerment, I think, is typical in both instances. You know, so that if we think of peace and war not as binaries, and if you think of women and men as not, or masculinity and femininity not as binaries, then the question of what is being solved in these conflicts through women's empowerment becomes more complicated. So in other words, it's not just women solving men's problems, but also, as Wening pointed out, that there are also women's problems, and men also are solving problems for women, right? And that's also typical for war, right? So we have kind of this logic of masculinist protection of men having to work and go to fight because of the family, because of the community, and so on. And it is that logic, I think, that needs to be disrupted, and you know, kind of answers a little bit to Ibui's question about, you know, where does that leave us? What's next? I think that's actually really crucial. That is my first point. The second point I'd like to make, that's basically maybe not become so clear in our presentations, but again, Ibui, you brought that up very nicely. That is, we used an explicitly feminist research method. And that means we worked from the bottom up. We were interested in everyday peace building exercises. So we were not necessarily interested in, you know, what is the UN doing when they come in, or what are the NGOs doing, and so on. But we started from the presumption that there's a lot of peace building going on in the everyday lives of people. And so that allowed us to make things visible. It allowed us to do action research, also to make bring certain things to the fore. Yeah, and it allowed us to, realize the complexity. You talked about violence against women. We have in the book an interlude, we call it, about violence against women, and it is a very self-critical interlude, because one of the things that we set out to do when we wanted, we started the project, was we wanted to actually learn about gender-based violence during conflict, also as an indicator of gender equality and so on. But it's kind of dropped out of our research gradually, and we were kind of then asking ourselves in the at the end, why did that happen? There's all kinds of answers. I'm not going to go into that now, but part of our feminist method meant that we admitted mistakes and we were reflexive about what was going on, because there's something also about sexual violence, gender-based violence, very easily being silenced, and we kind of fell into that trap. So I think that was important. Just one quick follow-up on the question of agency. We're using this idea that femininity was consciously, strategically used. And I think that's true to a certain extent, right? In a way, I think of that as more as an analytical argument to make, because clearly the men didn't say, oh, why don't we use femininity? And, and then they strategized about it. I mean, clearly that's not how it happened. So we're kind of imposing an interpretation of what was happening there. The language was in that direction, but the women also knew it, right? They said, if we are in the front there, it's just less violent. And they're not going to throw the men into jail. So it was also, in a way, one could interpret it as a joint strategizing, with, I do think, certain unintended effects. But that boundary between conscious and unconscious, or, when is it strategic and when is it just everyday social construction that happens, I think that's ultimately probably difficult to draw. And, I think for us, that was an analytical point we wanted to make, rather than the fact that it is actually real in any sense that anything is real. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Ibu Elisabeth. And we would like to also give the time to Ibu Arifah to respond to the questions and also the comments.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak Icha. I think I just want to take a small part of the rest of the time, I think, because Lisa and Mbak Wening already touched about the agency. I think one thing that I remember about the feminists argue is that really post-conflict for women, right? Actually, there is no post-conflict for women. Even though the conflict was ended by signing the peace agreement, but the violence are still there, structurally, culturally, and directly with the sexual-based violence, for example. Yeah. So we know that, and I think even though our book didn't really talk about it explicitly, but I think the argument we want to show that actually there is no post-conflict for women, because they have to struggle against the violence that always happened during and after the conflict was ended. I think it is still there. I think this is very important, and I think that's what we want to show, want to say also from our book, that there is no post-conflict. Peacebuilding, another is about femininity, Lisa. I think maybe actually consciously we want to say that there is a spectrum of feminities, from using the essentialism, the basic core of being women or being feminist, but as well as another way of using violence as to see that actually women also have the power to do something for their conflict. That Mbak Iye, thank you so much, touching about the weakness of Indonesian WPS. It is the first, even though the second WPS, we have the second generation of WPS, but against when we define about the conflict, when we define about the role of woman, all has been defined by the state. Yeah. So conflict, why we need to bring the women into the table, because they fight against each other, not against the state, not against the military. Yeah. So it is very crucial point from the Indonesian WPS, because we base on the conflict definition that has been defined by and fixed by our government, which is from our book, we saw that actually conflict happened in women daily life in Indonesia. Yeah. So, but I think the government didn't recognize this conflict. But I hope we have to work together on defining the third generation of WPS, not only touching about the communal conflict, not only touching about the terrorism, because again, terrorism, who define that? That's again the state, our government define who are the terrorists, and maybe we all terrorists in the sense that we fight against this state of mind, but who anarchists or are not, something like that. So I think thank you so much for that, and I will not repeat what Lisa and Mbak Wening said, but yes, actually women has power, but at the same time, women are still struggling for the violence that they have to face in daily life, even in the situation of what we call as the post-conflict in Indonesia. Mbak Icha, return it to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ibu Arifah. Unfortunately, our time is up for this afternoon. Thank you so much. I don't see that there is any questions posted in the comments, but probably I just read aloud some appreciation here. Thank you, everyone. Very interesting and inspiring talk and discussion about peace and conflicts. That's from Rahmat Hidayat, and also from Jemi Talakwa said, I don't have question, but I have comments in this book. This is a great book. I'm proud as a part of research since 2014 to 2019. In this book to explain gender dimensions in social conflict. It's interesting and inspiring. This is a new perspective in conflict studies. Thank you to Professor Ellis, Professor Wening, and Dr. Arifah. Yes, and I think that's it. I think Ibu Diana also post here wrongly, probably to direct message to me, saying that, oh, I must learn more about gender. Professor Elisabeth and Professor Wening have given me great insights about this topic. So thank you very much for the appreciation and also for the participation. Please give loud applause to all the participants, discussions, and also the questions from the participant as well. Thank you so much. And this is the book. I will post in the chat box about how, if you want to get the book, it consists of 8 chapters here, and it's very interesting. We discussed 2 of them, and it will be more and more to discover in this book. So again, congratulations to Ibu Wening, Ibu Lisa, and also Ibu Arifah and all the team. Thank you very much for Ibu Yi for the great and comprehensive comments and also the discussions. Thank you so much and have a nice evening, early evening. Okay, bye-bye. See you again in the next.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Congratulations again. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mbak Yi, for the discussion.
Sama-sama.
Very